Ray Mitchell, a 76-year-old Vietnam War veteran and retired Marine Corps sergeant, stared in disbelief from his wheelchair. It had taken all of his morning strength to wheel himself 2 blocks from his tiny apartment to the City Hall steps, just to hold that flag high in the silent protest. Now it lay crushed under the boot of a security officer, half his age, who sneered as if Ray's sacrifice meant nothing. "This isn't your battlefield anymore, old man," the officer muttered, grabbing Ray's lapel. Time to pack it up. But Ray didn't move. His hands clutched the worn wooden pole like it was a rifle from Khe-Sanh. His jaw clenched, his eyes locked on the flag. "I bled for that flag," Ray said calmly. "You don't get to toss it in the dirt." It all started that morning when Ray had rolled up to City Hall to join a peaceful veterans protest, an assembly of older vets objecting to recent cuts in state benefits. He'd worn his faded dress blues, his chest heavy with ribbons that most people no longer recognize. But Ray didn't come for recognition. He came to remind his city that service shouldn't be forgotten the moment the uniform comes off. That's when the trouble started. A younger security guard, Officer Travis Dade, claimed the protest didn't have proper permits. He ordered everyone to disperse. When Ray refused to leave, Dade grabbed his flag and yanked it from his hands. The pole snapped against the pavement. The flag fell and was kicked aside. Ray didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He picked up his phone with shaking hands and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Colonel," he said when the voice answered, "it's Ray. I've got a situation downtown. They just kicked my flag into the dirt." There was a pause. Then a voice cold and familiar replied, "Say no more. Sit tight. We're coming." Ray ended the call, his thumb trembling as it hovered over the screen. He didn't have to say anything else. The voice on the other end belonged to Colonel Everett Mason, his old commanding officer from the 3rd Marine Division. Ray hadn't spoken to him in nearly a decade, but there were some bonds you never needed to explain. A crowd had started to gather. Some passers-by looked on with confusion. A few younger folks had their phones out, filming, murmuring, as they saw the disabled veteran, sitting firm, the broken flagpole resting across his lap. Officer Dade, pacing now, seemed uneasy with the attention. He pointed to Ray's chair. "I said, move," he barked, voice sharper now, eyes flickering toward the cell phones aimed his way. Ray didn't flinch. He simply raised what was left of the flagpole and held it up again, half-mast, now his arms shaking but steady. "I'm not blocking traffic. I'm not raising hell," he said. "I'm just holding my ground, something I was trained to do." And then it happened. 10 minutes after the call, the sound of polished boots hitting pavement echoed from around the corner. A convoy of black SUVs pulled up, military plates glinting in the sunlight. The back doors swung open before the engines even stopped. Out stepped Marines. Not just any Marines, men and women in full-dress blues, led by Colonel Everett Mason himself, still straight-backed at 74 silver hair beneath his white service cap, his medals catching the morning light like fire. Officer Dade took a step back as the Marines advanced, not aggressively but with purpose. They formed 2 lines and marched silently toward Ray. The crowd parted. Phones rose higher. Colonel Mason stopped before the broken flag and bent slowly to retrieve it. He brushed the dirt from its stars and stripes with a gloved hand, then turned to the officer. "You took this from a Marine Mason," said his voice low, but resonating with decades of command, "and you threw it in the dirt." It was an unauthorized protest, Dade snapped, fumbling his words now. He didn't have a permit. He was... A combat veteran, Mason interrupted, rising to full height. "Who bled so you could wear that badge?" The colonel turned, stepped to Ray's chair, and saluted. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You are not alone." Ray, still holding the snapped pole, blinked hard, his jaw tight. "Always figured the Corps might forget an old cripple," he whispered. "Never," Mason replied. "Not on my watch." The crowd was silent. Someone lowered their phone, hand trembling. A child whispered to his father, "Is he a hero?" "No," the father said, eyes damp. "He's something rare. He's faithful." The air stood still for a moment, thick with something heavier than heat. Reverence, the kind of silence that follows a funeral rifle volley or the playing of taps. The Marines remained locked in formation behind Colonel Everett Mason, their boots perfectly aligned, their gazes steady and forward. Officer Dade took one more step back. He opened his mouth as if to speak again, perhaps to reassert control, perhaps to defend what was now indefensible. But no sound came out. Instead, he turned toward his cruiser and quietly spoke into the radio clipped to his shoulder. His posture had changed, no longer swaggering, no longer in command. Colonel Mason, still at Ray's side, motioned to the Marines behind him. Two stepped forward and without a word removed an American flag from a leather case. With practiced precision, they unfolded it, raising it high above the broken flagpole that lay across Ray's lap. "I believe this belongs here," Mason said, nodding toward the flag. One Marine took hold of the snapped pole, cradling it with the same care he might handle a fallen comrade. The other slid the new flag into Ray's grip. His hands, stiff from old injuries, trembled slightly as he held it close to his chest. Across the street, a local news van had arrived. A reporter jumped out, adjusting her mic, scrambling to catch the unfolding scene. "Sir," she called out to Mason, "what's happening here?" The colonel turned without hesitation. "What's happening," he said firmly, "is that a veteran stood his ground, and the Corps stood with him." Ray lifted the flag slowly, his arms weak but guided by a strength that no wound could erase. The Marines saluted again in perfect unison. That was the moment the crowd began to clap. Not loud at first, just one or two sets of hands, then a ripple spreading down the sidewalk, across the lot, echoing from doorways and storefronts. Strangers with tears in their eyes, veterans with medals pinned to denim jackets, young kids placing hands over hearts, watching something they'd never forget. Officer Dade didn't speak again. By the time his supervisor arrived, drawn by dozens of phone calls, viral video clips, and the growing presence of media, he had already returned to his squad car, face pale and fists clenched on the steering wheel. Lieutenant Grace Halbrook, a 10-year veteran of the force and herself a former Army MP, approached Ray directly. She had seen the footage on her phone before arriving and didn't wait for an explanation. She looked him in the eye and said, "Sergeant Mitchell, I'm sorry. You were wrong today." Ray nodded once. His voice was tired but clear. "I didn't ask for trouble." "No, sir," she said. "You asked for respect, and that's what you'll get." By that afternoon, the story had gone national. The headline blazed across screens from coast to coast: "Veteran with broken flag denied his dignity." Then the Marines arrived. By sundown, footage of the confrontation had made its way to every major network. News anchors spoke in solemn tones, highlighting the image of Sergeant Ray Mitchell seated in his wheelchair, cradling a folded American flag surrounded by a wall of Marines in full-dress blues. The public wasn't just watching, they were responding. Comments flooded social media. "This is not who we should be. Honor has a name, Ray Mitchell, and every officer in the country needs to see this." The pressure on local authorities was immediate and immense. Phoenix's mayor, already alerted by her staff, issued a formal statement that night, promising a full review of the incident and calling Ray's treatment an affront to every American who has worn the uniform. But it wasn't just words. Behind the scenes, phone calls were made, some from Capitol Hill, some from veterans organizations, and some from within the Phoenix Police Department itself. Officer Dade was placed on immediate administrative leave pending an internal affairs investigation. His history came under the microscope: previous complaints, a pattern of excessive use of force, and reports of dismissive behavior toward individuals with disabilities. Within 72 hours, the department's review board had enough to act. He was officially terminated, and a formal apology was issued not just to Ray, but to the entire veteran community. At the same time, Chief Maria Torres herself, a former Marine Corps logistics officer, stood before cameras during a press conference outside City Hall. "We failed a hero," she said plainly. "We will not do so again. Starting today, every officer under my command will undergo mandatory veteran sensitivity training, and Sergeant Ray Mitchell has agreed to serve as our lead consultant." Ray hadn't agreed easily. When first approached by the department, he was hesitant. "I didn't want to be anyone's symbol," he said. But after a long call with Colonel Mason and a visit from two Gold Star mothers who had watched the footage in tears, he reconsidered. "If my story can change how the next veteran is treated," he told the chief, "then I'll do it." The new training protocol, named the Mitchell Standard, launched that fall. Officers sat through simulations, studied real-case scenarios, and listened to firsthand stories of wounded veterans navigating daily civilian life. For many, it was the first time they truly understood the emotional weight that service carried long after the uniform was folded away. But change didn't stop at the precinct. State lawmakers introduced the Mitchell Bill, a bipartisan proposal that would require every law enforcement agency in Arizona to include annual training focused on interactions with disabled veterans and service animals. Within weeks, similar proposals appeared in neighboring states inspired by Ray's story and the overwhelming public support behind it. National news coverage reignited conversations about ADA enforcement, respect for veterans, and the role of community in protecting its own. Ray, meanwhile, found himself unexpectedly busy interviews, school visits, town hall panels. His quiet dignity made him a compelling figure. He never shouted, he never blamed, but he always told the truth. "My legs stayed in Iraq," he said in one televised interview. "But my pride came home with me, and no one, no badge, no law, no policy is going to take that from me." The grocery store where it all happened replaced its broken flagpole with a new one, stronger, taller, and illuminated at night. Beneath it, a bronze plaque was installed in honor of Sergeant Ray Mitchell, a reminder that dignity stands tallest when others try to tear it down. And just as in battle, Ray never stood alone again. 5 years had passed since the incident in that Phoenix parking lot, but Sergeant Ray Mitchell's impact had only grown stronger with time. He never imagined that a humiliating confrontation over a parking space would become the catalyst for national reform, but that's exactly what it became. The Mitchell Standard, now a federally endorsed training module, had been adopted by over 30 police departments across the U.S. It focused on veteran sensitivity, ADA compliance, and the importance of dignity in public service. Ray didn't just lend his name to it, he helped write every page, consulting directly with officers, trainers, and lawmakers. Ray continued to travel across the country in his restored van, speaking at town halls, veteran centers, and public schools. His service dog, Jack, now a bit grayer around the muzzle, remained faithfully by his side. Wherever Ray went, he brought calm strength, storytelling, and the kind of hard-won wisdom you couldn't find in textbooks. He never accepted praise easily. "I didn't change the world," he often said. "I just reminded it what we stand for." But to those who heard him speak, especially young recruits and disabled veterans, Ray had become a living legend. Back in Phoenix, the supermarket chain had turned its shame into stewardship. They now hosted monthly Veterans First community dinners and launched a hiring initiative prioritizing veterans and caregivers. The original handicapped space where Ray had been harassed was transformed into a granite-plated memorial, reading "Reserved in honor of Sergeant Ray Mitchell, Defender of Dignity." Despite his age, he remained active. He served on the advisory board for the Department of Veterans Affairs and mentored wounded soldiers adjusting to civilian life. Letters poured in from fellow Marines, from law enforcement officers he had helped retrain, and from families who'd once felt invisible. To all of them, Ray responded in his neat, careful handwriting. But perhaps the most touching moment came when a high school senior in Chicago delivered his valedictorian speech inspired by Raybo. "I want to be someone who speaks up," the student said, "because I learned from a Marine in a wheelchair that silence helps no one." Ray watched the clip from his living room, wiping his eyes. That he whispered, "That's worth more than any medal." Ray Mitchell's story teaches us that courage doesn't always roar. It sometimes rolls in on four wheels with quiet resolve and an unshakable belief in doing what's right. His fight wasn't on the battlefield this time, it was in a parking lot against ignorance, arrogance, and injustice. And yet he won, not with anger, not with force, but with truth, dignity, and the unbreakable strength of lived experience. Share this story with someone who needs to remember what real courage looks like. Subscribe so we can keep telling the stories that mainstream media too often forgets, stories that show the heart of America still beats strong in its veterans. Because honor isn't just earned, it must be protected. And when one veteran stands tall, even in a wheelchair, it reminds us all to do the same.